But your question 5 is the evaluation question. And what I mean by that is that they give you a particular, in theory, sort of a quote that a student has said. In this case, Connell feels uncomfortable at the party. And then they say, how far do you agree with this? And you basically always agree. So if you're doing 5 to 10 quotes, you might want to do one quote where you don't agree and say something else, but generally you're going to agree. So question 4 is, Connell feels uncomfortable at the party. How far do you agree with this view? You should talk about your own thoughts and feelings about how Connell was presented in the passage and how the writer has created these thoughts and feelings. So question 5, last question in the exam. Agree with a question, e.g. Connell is uncomfortable at the party. Look for 5 to 6 quotes that prove this. I've gone slightly below the normal quote just because it's the last question and we'd be struggling for time. And you could do 1 or 2 quotes where you say a different opinion of Connell. So maybe you could say, although I feel he's uncomfortable at the party, with this quote, it might show he's confident. It's just the same as the other how questions in the exam we talked about. Just rephrase it to make it a how question. So what I mean by that is you could easily say, how does the writer make Connell seem uncomfortable at the party? Okay. So here's the extract. Connell doesn't know anyone at the party. The person who invited him isn't the same person who answered the door, and with an indifferent shrug let him inside. He still hasn't seen the person who invited him, a person called Gareth who's in his class. Connell knew going to a party on his own would be a bad idea, but on the phone Lorraine said it would be a good idea. I won't know anyone, he told her, and she said patiently, you won't get to know anyone if you go out and meet people. That's Lorraine is Connell's mum. Now he's here, standing on his own in the crowded room, not knowing whether to take his jacket off. Finally, just as he decides to leave, Connell comes in. Connell's intense relief at seeing Gareth triggers another wave of self-loathing, since he doesn't even know Gareth very well or particularly like him. Gareth puts his hand out and desperately, bizarrely, Connell finds himself shaking it. It's a low moment in his adult life. People are watching them shake hands. Connell is certain of this. Connell was wearing a completely plain navy backpack with no features to distinguish it from any of the other numerous backpacks at the party. People in college are like this, unpleasantly smug 1 minute and then showing off their good manners the next. You're not from Dublin, are you? Says Gareth. No, Sligo. Oh yeah, my girlfriend's from Sligo. Connell isn't sure what Gareth expects him to say to this. Oh, he replies weakly. Well, there you go. Awkwardly, he looks around the room and says, you live here, do you? Yeah, says Gareth. Not bad for campus accommodation, is it? No, yeah, it's really nice, actually. Connell isn't sure. Oh, we've done that bit. Back home, Connell's shyness never seemed like much of an obstacle to his social life because everyone knew who he was already, and there was never any need to introduce himself or create impressions about his personality. Now he has a sense of invisibility, nothingness, with no reputation to recommend him to anyone. Though his physical appearance has not changed, he feels objectively worse looking than he used to be. He's become self-conscious about his clothes. All the guys in his class wear the same expensive hunting jackets and plum-coloured chinos. Not that Connell has a problem with people dressing how they want, but he would feel like a complete prick wearing that stuff. At the same time, it forces him to acknowledge that his own clothes are cheap and unfashionable. His only shoes are an ancient pair of Adidas trainers, which he wears everywhere, even to the gym. Gareth is saying something Connell can't hear now. The music is playing very loudly. Connell leans forward a little towards Gareth and says, what? My girlfriend, you should meet her, says Gareth. I'll introduce you. Glad of a break in the conversation, Connell follows Gareth out the main door and onto the front steps. Okay, so go through it, highlight or look for 5 or 10 quotes that show Connell is uncomfortable. Remember, we need that intro little quote. I agree, Connell's uncomfortable. If you don't do the intro sentence, you're going to struggle to get more than 1 out of 10. So I agree that Connell was uncomfortable at the party. I'll give you 1 quote that I think. 1 quote that shows this is when he says he didn't know whether to take his jacket off. This signals to the reader, and then you can finish it. So you could say maybe this signals to the reader. Connell doesn't really know if he's going to stay or not, for example. Okay, here's the ones I've highlighted. Feel free to pause. Again, little intro sentence. I agree Connell feels comfortable. I'm linking back to the question. Okay, so let's look at 1 quote then. So I've put Connell has a sense of invisibility. So again, if I looked that up in the dictionary, what would invisibility mean? Well, invisible, it would sort of basically mean not being seen. Okay, so I've put one quote that tells me Connell is uncomfortable is he has a sense of invisibility, nothingness, which shows me he's feeling ignored and insignificant. Again, don't put invisible because it's too close to the quote. But again, my yellow is my link into my question, my blue is my quote, and my green is my explanation why that quote proves Connell was uncomfortable. So if you're feeling invisible at a party, you feel ignored, insignificant, doesn't really matter if you're there or not. No one's going to miss you if you go. Okay, another one. The person who invited him isn't the same person who answered the door, and with an indifferent shrug. So why would that make Connell uncomfortable? Well, if you shrug, so imagine going into the party, you ask someone a question you don't know anyone at the party, you don't know the person who's invited you, and this is what is met when you walk in. So I put the first person he meets at the party greets him with an indifferent shrug. This would make Connell feel unimportant and though no one has any interest in him being there. I put the first reason I feel he feels uncomfortable is that he doesn't know anyone at the party. So nice and simple. If you don't know anyone at the party, you're going to feel uncomfortable. The quote, he feels objectively worse looking than he used to be. He's become self-conscious about his clothes. Well, why would he feel uncomfortable about that? I put he feels worse looking than he used to be, and he's worried about his cheap and unfashionable clothes. He feels uncomfortable comparing himself to the privileged people at the party with their expensive clothes. So I've managed to get 3 or 4 quotes in there, and it's pretty self-explanatory, isn't it? If he feels like he's wearing cheap clothes, and every single person at the party has got expensive clothes, he's going to feel uncomfortable. Another quote. People are watching them shake hands. Connell is certain of this. Why would that make him feel uncomfortable? So I put Connell feels uncomfortable as he feels people are watching how he behaves. Okay, and then it's a few shorter ones here. He also feels uncomfortable as he didn't want to go in the first place. So right at the start, he tells us he doesn't want to go. The reader gets the impressions with the quote, Lorraine said it was a good idea, that his mum has had to persuade him to go for his own good, to meet people. The quote, not knowing whether to take his coat off, shows how uncomfortable he is. He is unsure of his surroundings and how to act around the Trinity students. Another reason he feels uncomfortable is he's not very fond of the only person he knows. The quote is he doesn't know Gareth very well or particularly like him. So imagine if you were going to a party and the one person you actually knew you thought was a bit of a prat. He also feels uncomfortable as he's struggling to make conversation with Gareth. In the text it says Connell isn't sure what Gareth expects him to say. Additionally, he replies weakly and looks around awkwardly. So if you look at those adverbs used, weakly and awkwardly, both of those suggest Connell's a little bit embarrassed and doesn't really know how to fill the conversation. And I put finally the quote, glad of a break in the conversation, shows Connell is uncomfortable talking to Gareth. He's actually happy and relieved when the conversation has ended. So he's glad. One of the connotations with glad, basically feeling happy or joyous that the conversation has had a bit of a break in it. Okay, so we've done all the questions. Here's some structure for here's some structure for each question. These are all made up answers, by the way, but just for structure. So remember, question 1 is a bullet point question. Question 2, impressions. So 1 impression I get. So for each impression question, give me the word impression, give me the impression, then the quote to back it up. Remember with the how question, again, link to the question, give me the quote and say why it proves it. So, for example, Connell and Marianne have a connection to each other. I've put the writer shows an attraction with the quote, it's not like this with other people. Marianne is telling Connell she thinks they have a special and unique relationship. Connell feels uncomfortable. How far do you agree? Remember that intro sentence. Then I've done another a made up quote where I put, he seems uncomfortable with the quote, the conversation gave him a thumping headache. Why does that make Connell uncomfortable? This tells the reader the party's almost making him feel physically unwell. Okay, so here's some structure for all of them. I hope the video has been some use. Any questions, leave me a question in the comment box on YouTube.